Snow buried the city in silence when a billionaire's car stopped beside a narrow alley. Under a trembling light, a small girl slept with a stitched-up rabbit in her arms. He thought he was helping for one night until she whispered a rule that changed everything. Lights don't fall asleep. Snow didn't fall gently that night. It pressed down on Lake Haven like a held breath, muting sound, blurring edges, turning streets into narrow tunnels of white. Callum Reeve sat in the back seat of his black sedan, coat-buttoned, phone dark in his hand. The city moved around him, but none of it touched him. 35 years old. Tech billionaire. A life measured in acquisitions and exits, and somehow still hollow. "Road ahead's blocked," the driver said. "We'll need to cut through the service road." Callum barely nodded. The car slowed, tires crunching softly as they turned past closed storefronts and loading docks buried in snow. That was when he saw it. "Stop," Callum said. The driver hesitated. Sir Callum leaned forward. There, the alley. Between two shuttered buildings was a narrow gap barely wide enough for a person to stand. Above a metal back door, a single security light buzzed and flickered, fighting the storm. Beneath it, curled against the brick half hidden in shadow, was a small shape. At first, Callum thought it was trash. Cardboard, a bundle of coats. Then the shape moved. Callum opened the door before the driver could protest. Cold sliced through him, instantly sharp and unforgiving. Snow stung his face as he stepped closer, shoes sinking into slush. It was a little girl. She was lying on flattened cardboard, wrapped in a thin jacket far too light for the night. Her knees were drawn to her chest. In her arms, she held a stuffed rabbit, one ear crudely stitched back on with mismatched thread. She wasn't crying. She wasn't calling out. She was sleeping carefully, like someone who had learned how to disappear without vanishing. Callum stopped several feet away. The light above her flickered, then steadied. For the first time that night, something inside him did the same. Callum crouched slowly, keeping his hands visible, his movements deliberate. Snow drifted into the alley in lazy spirals, settling along the brick walls like silence made solid. "Hey," he said softly. "I'm not here to scare you." The girl's eyes opened. They were clear, alert, too calm for a child found sleeping in an alley during a winter storm. She didn't scramble away. She didn't cry. She simply watched him, fingers tightening slightly around the stuffed rabbit. Callum stayed where he was. "I'm just checking if you're okay," he continued, voice low and steady. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to." The girl blinked once. Snow dusted her dark hair, melting slowly along her lashes. Above them, the security light buzzed again, then steadied, casting a pale circle around her small body. "I'm okay," she said quietly. The words didn't convince him. They weren't meant to. They were practiced. Callum glanced at the cardboard beneath her, the thin jacket, the storm pressing in from all sides. "It's very cold tonight," he said. "Have you been here long?" The girl hesitated, then shrugged. "A while." Callum felt the weight of that word. He shifted slightly, lowering himself closer to the ground, so he wasn't towering over her. "My name's Callum," he said. "You don't have to tell me yours." She studied his face as if testing whether that sentence was true. After a moment, she looked down at the rabbit instead. "Her name's Junie," she said, nodding at the toy. Callum smiled faintly. "She looks like a good listener." The girl's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. A gust of wind tore through the alley, scattering snow across the concrete. The girl didn't flinch. She leaned slightly closer to the light. Callum followed her gaze upward. "That light," he said gently. "Is that why you chose this spot?" She nodded once. "It stays on," she replied. Callum sat back on his heels, the cold seeping through his pants. He welcomed it. It kept him present. Kept him from rushing, from fixing, from saying the wrong thing too fast. "Are you waiting for someone?" he asked. The girl nodded, then shook her head. My mom's working, she said. She said to wait here. Here, Callum echoed softly. She looked up at the security light eyes reflecting its pale glow. Where it's bright. Something tightened in his chest. That's a smart plan, he said. Lights help people see you. The girl considered this, then nodded again more confidently this time. Callum glanced back toward the car. Steam rose faintly from the hood. I have something warm in there, he said carefully. Hot chocolate. Would you like some? Her shoulders stiffened. I'm not supposed to take things. Okay, Callum said immediately. No disappointment? No pressure? That's okay. Snow fell between them, thick and quiet. After a moment, she asked, Is it extra, Callum repeated. Like, I have to pay later. He shook his head. No extra, no trade, just warm. She thought about that for a long time, long enough that Callum didn't interrupt. Finally, she nodded once. Callum moved, slowly retrieved the cup, and returned just as carefully. He placed it on the ground between them, not close enough to crowd her. She wrapped her hands around it, inhaling softly as the warmth reached her fingers. Thank you, she whispered, like the words themselves might cost something. You're welcome, Callum replied. You're not in trouble. She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned a little closer to the light. Lights don't fall asleep, she said quietly. Callum looked up at the buzzing fixture overhead, and for the first time in years, he believed her. The snow began to fall harder, not louder, just heavier, as if the night itself were leaning in. Callum glanced at his watch, then at the mouth of the alley. Time moved strangely here, stretched thin by cold and quiet. Are you warm enough? He asked. The girl nodded, though her fingers were still wrapped tightly around the paper cup. The steam curled upward, disappearing into the pale circle of light. Callum took a careful breath. I want to make sure you're safe tonight, he said. That means I need to call some people whose job is helping kids and families. Her hands froze. Am I in trouble? She asked. The question landed softly, but it hit deep. No, Callum said immediately, firm and gentle all at once. You didn't do anything wrong. Needing help isn't wrong. She searched his face again, longer this time, like she was reading small print. Snow gathered in her hair, melting slowly at her temples. My mom will be mad, she said quietly. Callum chose his words like stepping stones across ice. I think she'll be worried first. And then relieved. The girl looked down at Junie the rabbit. She pressed its stitched ear flat with her thumb, thinking. Finally, she nodded, small, precise. Okay. Callum stepped a few feet away, turning slightly so his back wasn't fully to her. He made the call calmly, clearly stating only what he knew, and nothing he didn't. Location. Weather. A child found safe, alert, unharmed. No assumptions. When he ended the call, the alley felt even quieter than before. They're coming, he said when he returned. Just to help us figure things out. The girl nodded, then reached into her pocket and pulled out something small and crumpled. A plastic band, faded and thin. It says me, she whispered. Callum read it carefully. Maeve Hart. He felt the name settle into him, warm and heavy at the same time. Well, Maeve, he said gently. I'm really glad you chose the light tonight. Above them it buzzed steady, now stubborn against the storm. The alley became an island. Snow filled the air so thickly that the rest of the city faded into suggestion. Callum shrugged out of his coat slowly, deliberately, each movement a question, not a decision. He draped it over Maeve's shoulders without touching her, letting gravity do the work. She stiffened at first. Then, realizing he wasn't pulling it tighter, she relaxed and drew it around herself. Thank you, she said again, quieter this time. Callum sat back down on the cold concrete far enough to give space close enough to block the wind when it cut sideways through the alley. The cold soaked into his legs. He didn't mind. You did exactly what you were supposed to do, he said after a while. You waited where it was bright. Maeve nodded. My mom said lights don't fall asleep. That's a good rule, Callum replied. A very good one. She took a careful sip of cocoa, then another. Her breathing slowed. Junie rested beneath her chin, now no longer clenched, like a lifeline, just held like company. Callum checked his phone. A message blinked onto the screen. Units en route. ET at 10 minutes. 10 minutes could feel like nothing or everything. A gust of wind tore through the alley. Maeve flinched, not in fear, but reflexively like someone bracing for a door to slam. Callum shifted slightly, positioning himself between her and the wind without crowding her space. Can I ask you something? Maeve said suddenly. Of course. Are you a helper? She asked. Or just someone who stopped Callum, thought about boardrooms, contracts, decisions that moved people without ever touching them? I think he said slowly, I'm someone who stopped, and that makes it my job to help. Maeve considered this. Then she nodded, satisfied. Above them, the light flickered, once then stayed on. The sound came first, a distant engine pushing through snow tires, complaining softly against ice. Maeve's head lifted immediately. Is that them? Almost, Callum said. Red and white lights appeared at the far end of the service road, blurred by snowfall. Not sirens. Just steady, careful movement. Two adults approached on foot, boots sinking into snow coats marked with city insignia. One knelt several feet away, mirroring Callum's posture. Hi there, the woman said gently. I'm Dana. This is Omar. We're here to help. Maeve glanced at Callum. They're the helpers I told you about, he said. That seemed to matter. Dana spoke calmly, asking simple questions. Was Maeve cold, hungry, hurt? Maeve answered honestly, nodding or shaking her head when needed. No pressure, no interrogation. Omar offered a thermal blanket, showing her how it worked, before placing it around her shoulders. Maeve allowed it, tucking Junie beneath it like a secret. She's been doing everything right, Callum said quietly to Dana. I didn't want to assume anything. Dana met his eyes. There was relief there. You did the right thing calling. The alley felt different now, less forgotten. Inside the outreach vehicle, warmth bloomed instantly, windows fogged. Maeve sat in the back between Dana and Omar, bundled and quiet. Callum took the seat across from her, angled away so she wouldn't feel watched. We're going to a nearby clinic, Dana explained softly. Just to make sure you're okay and to help us contact your mom. Maeve nodded. She works late. Then she's probably very tired, Dana said, and very worried. Callum leaned forward slightly. We'll make sure she knows you're safe. Maeve looked at him. You're coming, yes, Callum said. If that's okay with you. She nodded once. As the car pulled away, Callum watched the alley recede in the rear window, the single light shrinking into the snow. But something told him it wouldn't go out. The clinic didn't smell like fear. It smelled like disinfectant, warm air, and something faintly sweet tea, maybe. The lights were bright, but soft, designed not to shout. Maeve noticed that immediately. She held Junie tight as Dana opened the car door. Inside is warm, Dana said gently. And we'll tell you what we're doing before we do anything. Maeve nodded. That mattered to her. Being told first. A nurse introduced herself and crouched to Maeve's height. I'm going to check your temperature. Is that okay? Maeve glanced at Callum. He nodded once. You're in control. That settled it. The exam was simple. No rush. No urgency that turned into panic. Maeve answered questions carefully, like each word needed to be placed exactly right. Cold a little. Hurt, noption. Hungry. She hesitated, then nodded. Crackers appeared. Juice. Choices, not commands. Callum stood near the wall, hands in his coat pockets, watching a world he had never been invited into before. Not because of money, but because of trust. Maeve sat at a small table afterward, crayons spread out in careful rows. She drew a large yellow circle, thick and deliberate. That's the light, she explained when Callum noticed. So it stays on? He asked. She nodded seriously. Lights get tired if you don't remind them. Callum smiled, something unfamiliar warming his chest. Dana returned with updates. We're narrowing down where your mom might be. Weather's slowing things, but we're making calls. Maeve's shoulders tightened. She's not in trouble, right? No, Dana said immediately. She's working. Nights can get complicated. Maeve absorbed that, then added short lines around the yellow circle rays. Outside, snow continued to fall. Inside, time slowed to a gentler rhythm. No alarms, no raised voices. For the first time that night, Maeve leaned back in her chair, and Callum realized something quietly extraordinary was happening. She wasn't bracing anymore. Minutes passed, then more. The clinic hummed softly, paper sliding, distant footsteps, the muted chime of a monitor somewhere down the hall. Maeve colored in silence, tongue caught briefly between her teeth as she focused. Dana's phone vibrated. She stepped aside, listened, nodded once, then again. When she returned, her smile had changed. It wasn't careful anymore. It was relieved. We found her, Dana said gently. Your mom. Maeve's head snapped up. She's okay. She's okay, Dana confirmed. And she's been looking for you. Maeve's breath left her in a long, shaky exhale, as if she'd been holding it since the alley. Callum felt his own chest loosen in response. He hadn't realized he was holding his breath too. What's her name? Maeve asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it. Marisol Hart. Maeve nodded. She works nights. She told us, Dana said. She's on her way. Maeve pressed Junie to her cheek, eyes shining but dry. I waited, she whispered. Like she said. Callum knelt beside her. You did everything right. Maeve looked at him, studying his face again, the way she had in the alley. You stayed. Yes, Callum said softly. I stayed. When Marisol arrived, the world shifted. She came in wrapped in a borrowed coat, snow clinging to her sleeves, hair pulled back too quickly. The moment she saw Maeve, everything else disappeared. Maeve, she breathed. Maeve was out of her chair instantly. Marisol dropped to her knees just in time, arms closing around her daughter, laughter and sobs colliding in the same breath. I'm here, Marisol whispered. I'm so sorry. Maeve shook her head against her mother's shoulder. I waited where the light was. Marisol closed her eyes, holding her tighter. You did exactly right. Callum stood back, giving them space. This wasn't rescue. It was reunion. And it was louder than any siren. Dana explained everything calmly, where Maeve had been found, how the call was made, what steps were taken. There was no accusation in her voice, only clarity. Marisol listened, nodding her arm, never loosening around Maeve. When Dana gestured toward Callum, Marisol finally looked up. Her eyes were tired, guarded, protective. He stopped, Dana said simply, and he called. Marisol studied Callum for a long moment, then gave a small nod. Thank you, she said, voice thick, for not walking past. Callum shook his head. She told me where to wait. I just listened. Maeve tugged at Marisol's sleeve. This is Callum. He brought warm. That broke something open. Marisol managed a faint smile. Then I owe you more than a thank you. No, Callum said gently. You don't. Outside, the storm pressed harder. Buses were delayed, roads closed. Dana spoke again. We've arranged a warm place for the night, a hotel nearby, just until morning. Everything documented, everything optional. Marisol hesitated, the instinct of someone who'd learned to be careful with kindness. Maeve looked up. Can we go? Marisol nodded slowly. Yes, then Maeve turned to Callum. Can you come? Callum crouched so they were eye level. Only if your mom says it's okay. Marisol met his gaze. She saw no urgency there, no ownership, just presence. If you'd like, she said carefully. I'd like, Callum replied. The hotel room was small but clean, warmed by a steady heater. Maeve changed into fresh pajamas, swinging her legs on the bed, Junie tucked under one arm. The light didn't turn off, she said proudly. Marisol brushed her hair back. No, baby. It didn't. Callum stayed near the door, giving them space. That night didn't end with fear. It ended with warmth, quiet breathing, and the certainty that just this once the light had stayed on long enough. Morning arrived quietly, as if the city itself wasn't sure it was allowed to wake them. Pale winter light slipped through the thin hotel curtains, landing softly across Maeve's face. She stirred, blinking once, then smiled when she realized where she was. The heater hummed steadily, not loud enough to demand attention, just enough to promise warmth. Marisol woke moments later, exhaustion settling in, only after relief had arrived. She sat up slowly, pressing a hand to her chest, grounding herself in the fact that Maeve was right there, safe, breathing evenly. Junie tucked beneath her chin. A gentle knock sounded at the door. Marisol stiffened instinctively. Maeve sat up. It's okay, she said. That's how helpers knock. Marisol opened the door to find Callum standing in the hallway with 2 paper bags and an uncertain smile. He didn't step inside. I brought breakfast, he said. Only if that's all right. Maeve nodded enthusiastically. Warm, very warm. They ate together at the small table, toast, eggs, juice. Nothing fancy. Everything deliberate. Maeve took her time, savoring each bite as if food had become something worth noticing again. Callum noticed she always glanced at her mother before reaching for something new. Later, Dana returned with a clipboard. Today's about next steps, she explained calmly. No rush, no pressure. She outlined options carefully: transportation assistance during storms, after-school care near Marisol's workplace, and a housing opening closer to the warehouse where Marisol worked nights. Every sentence came with a pause. Every pause came with permission to say no. Marisol listened intently, asking questions, taking notes in the margins like someone building a bridge plank by plank. Maeve colored beside them, drawing the alley again, but this time the light was brighter. People stood beneath it. That's us, Maeve said simply. Callum stayed quiet, resisting the urge to solve everything all at once. For the first time in years, he understood something important. Stability didn't arrive with speed, it arrived with patience. By midday, the hotel room had transformed into a temporary planning space. Forms lay neatly stacked on the desk. Dana explained each page before a pen ever touched paper. No surprises, no assumptions. One form paused everyone. Emergency contact, Dana read aloud. Someone we can reach if transportation is disrupted again, or if something unexpected happens. Marisol's pen hovered. Callum didn't move, didn't offer, didn't fill the silence. Maeve looked up from her crayons. Circles help, she said, tapping her drawing, so people know where to stand. Marisol swallowed, then wrote a name carefully. Callum Reeve. Callum felt the weight of it immediately. Not ownership, not control, responsibility. I'll answer, he said simply. Anytime. Maeve smiled, satisfied. You're in my circle now. Callum smiled back slower. Then I'll do my best to earn that. After Dana left, the room felt quieter, less procedural, more human. Marisol exhaled deeply, like someone setting down a heavy bag after a long walk. I didn't know it could feel like this, she admitted. Asking for help, Callum nodded. I didn't either. Before they parted, Maeve tugged gently at Callum's sleeve. Can we go see it? He understood immediately. The alley, the light, she corrected. They drove slowly down the service road. In daylight, the alley looked smaller, less frightening. The security light was off now, unnecessary under the pale sky. Maeve frowned. Lights rest too, Callum said gently. But they're still there. She seemed satisfied with that. She stepped to the exact spot where she'd slept, placing Junie carefully on the ground. Then she whispered not to either of them, but to the place itself. Thank you. Marisol watched, eyes shining. Callum studied the alley, how something so ordinary had held so much meaning. And in that moment, an idea began to form. Quiet, persistent, like a light that refused to go out. The idea followed Callum home. It followed him into the elevator of his penthouse, into the silence of rooms that had never known uncertainty. It followed him as snow melted along the windows and the city slowly found its rhythm again. He stood across the street from the alley one early morning, hands tucked into his coat, breath fogging the air. The back doors, the cracked pavement, the place where Maeve had waited without knowing if anyone would come. Hope rarely announced itself. It just stayed. Callum called Sloane Park, the housing coordinator Dana had introduced earlier. I want to fund something, he said, but not loudly. Sloane paused. What kind of something? A place, Callum replied. That stays lit. Warm benches, clear rules, no questions asked. A space where waiting doesn't feel dangerous. Sloane was quiet for a moment. Then we do this with the community, not at them. Yes, Callum said. Exactly. Meetings followed. Folding chairs, coffee gone cold. Residents spoke. Callum listened. Not everyone trusted him. He didn't expect them to. What happens if it fails? Someone asked. Callum answered honestly. Then we learn. And we keep helping another way. Maeve sat near Marisol's feet, swinging her legs. When the room went quiet, she raised her hand. Will the lights stay on? She asked. Callum smiled, the answer steady in his chest. That's the whole point. Weeks later, wiring was replaced. Walls cleaned. New lights installed, no flicker, no buzz. On the night they tested them, snow fell again, soft and quiet. Maeve stood beneath the canopy, eyes wide as the lights turned on, steady, bright, unwavering. It's not scary anymore, she said. Callum knelt beside her. No, it's not. As the glow spilled across the pavement, reaching farther than it ever had before, Callum realized something profound. Stopping had changed a night. Staying was changing lives. The days that followed did not rush. They moved with care, as if everyone involved were afraid that one sudden motion might undo something fragile. Snow melted into slush, then into memory. Lake Haven returned to its routines, buses running on time again, storefront lights blinking back to life. For Maeve and Marisol, mornings now began with predictability. Breakfast at the small kitchen table, jackets hung by the door. A short walk to the after-school center where warm voices greeted Maeve by name. Maeve liked that part most, being named. Callum never arrived unannounced. He texted first, always. Is now okay? Sometimes the answer was no. He respected that. When he did come by, he stayed near the doorway, shoes still on, like a guest who understood that help had to stop short of intrusion. Maeve would wave from the couch, Junie tucked beneath her arm, eyes bright but calm. She laughed more now. The sound surprised Callum every time. Not the polite laughter he knew from boardrooms and fundraisers, but the unguarded kind that arrived without permission. One afternoon, Callum sat in his car across the street from the after-school center engine, off watching through the window as Maeve worked on a puzzle with two other children. She leaned in, focused, tongue briefly caught between her teeth. When a piece clicked into place, she laughed. Something in Callum's chest loosened. Sloane slid into the passenger seat, clipboard balanced on her knee. Housing update, she said. There's an opening 2 blocks from Marisol's warehouse. Better lighting, shorter commute. Callum nodded. Let Marisol decide. Sloane smiled faintly. She already did. She asked if it was okay to say yes. That evening, Callum stood in the hallway outside Marisol's apartment while she stepped out to speak with him. Maeve waved from the doorway. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, Marisol admitted quietly. Like this is borrowed time. Callum understood that feeling too well. Safety doesn't usually feel loud, he said. It feels boring, and that's okay. Marisol exhaled slowly. I want Maeve to grow up knowing help doesn't disappear when things get inconvenient. Callum met her gaze. Then we'll make sure it doesn't. Inside, Maeve held up a drawing. It showed a long path between buildings dotted with small yellow circles. So we don't forget where to go, she explained. Callum nodded, throat tight. Neither of them noticed it then, but that path was already becoming something permanent. Fear did not return with noise. It arrived quietly the way winter sometimes did, ordinary, almost reasonable. It was a Tuesday evening when Marisol's hand slipped from the kitchen counter. No crash, no drama. Just a moment where the room tilted enough for her to sit down hard on the floor. Maeve looked up from her coloring. "Mama, I'm okay," Marisol said immediately, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Just dizzy." Maeve did not panic. She stood carefully the way she'd learned to move when something felt uncertain. She grabbed her jacket, then stopped remembering the rules. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She called Callum. He arrived within minutes, coat half-zipped, hair still damp from snow. He knelt beside Marisol, asking calm questions, keeping his voice even grounded. At the clinic, the doctor was thorough and kind. Dehydration, exhaustion, nothing severe but a warning, a reminder that strength had limits. Maeve sat quietly in the waiting room. Junie in her lap, eyes fixed on the clock. "It won't stop right," she whispered to Callum. "The light." He knew what she meant. "No," he said softly. "It won't." That night, Maeve refused to sleep in her own bed. She curled up on the couch beside Callum, blanket tucked beneath her chin, nightlight glowing softly in the corner. Sometimes she whispered, "If I stay awake, bad things won't happen." Callum swallowed. He didn't promise perfection. He promised presence. "You don't have to guard the world alone," he said. "Adults stay too." Maeve leaned against him. Her breathing slowed. Sleep came. Outside, snow fell again, light, persistent. Callum stayed awake, not out of fear, but out of choice. 2 days later, Marisol sat at the small kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the floor. Maeve was at school. The apartment was quiet. "I can't do this alone forever," Marisol said, "and I don't want to pretend I can." Callum listened. "I want Maeve to grow up knowing help doesn't flicker," she continued. "Not when people get tired." She met his eyes. "And I trust you." The word settled heavy and clean between them. Callum exhaled slowly. "Then we do this the right way." Doing it the right way was not dramatic. It was paperwork read aloud. Boundaries discussed without offense. Time taken where impatience would have been easier. Dana and Sloane were present for every conversation. Nothing rushed, nothing hidden. Shared guardianship contingencies, emergency contacts, education funds that required oversight, healthcare access documented and reviewed. No saviors, no secrets. Weeks later, they sat in a quiet courtroom. No audience, no spectacle. Just a judge who spoke carefully, reviewing arrangements designed for stability, not ownership. Maeve sat in the back row with Junie in her lap, feet swinging slightly above the floor. She did not fidget. She did not look scared. When it was done, she didn't cheer. She smiled, small and sure. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily through the air. So Maeve said, walking between them, holding both hands, "This means we're a team." Marisol knelt to her level. "Yes, a team." Callum nodded. "The kind that stays." That evening, they walked past the new stay-lit station together. The lights glowed steadily, reflecting off fresh snow. Maeve stopped and looked up. "It didn't turn off," she said. "No," Callum replied. "And it won't." Maeve squeezed both their hands, satisfied. The world had not become perfect, but it had become reliable. And Callum realized that might be the greatest gift you could give a child. Not a rescue, not a miracle, but a promise that didn't flicker when winter returned. Construction finished quietly. No banners, no press, no speeches rehearsed for applause. Just workers packing up their tools beneath a canopy that no longer buzzed or flickered. The wiring was new. The lights were steady. The concrete had been smoothed and marked with simple guiding lines, nothing flashy, just enough to help tired feet find their way. The first night the station reopened, snow returned. Not angry snow, not storm snow, just soft flakes drifting down like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. Maeve stood beside Marisol under the canopy, her bright knit hat pulled low over her ears. Junie peeked out from her backpack. She tilted her head back, eyes wide, watching the lights glow evenly above her. "They don't shake," she said. "No," Callum replied, standing a step behind them. "They don't." Volunteers moved calmly inside, pouring hot water, arranging gloves and scarves by size, checking clipboards. No one hurried. No one stared. A man stopped first, then a woman, then another. They didn't rush in. They paused, uncertain, testing the space with their eyes. Maeve noticed. She didn't hide. She didn't stare. She simply stood where the light was. Marisol's hand hovered near her daughter's shoulder, not gripping, just ready. Callum watched that small gesture, the difference between fear and trust. Inside a sign hung near the entrance. Simple lettering. Clear rules. "Welcome. Stay warm. You are safe here." Maeve walked slowly through the space, fingertips brushing the smooth counter eyes, tracing the walls where old paint had once peeled. She stopped beneath the canopy again and looked up. "It's not scary anymore," she said. Callum knelt beside her. "No," he agreed. "It's not." Snow continued to fall. People came and went, no crowd, no spectacle, just shelter finding its purpose. Marisol leaned toward Callum, voice low. "I didn't think it would feel like this. Like what he asked. Like we built something without having to prove anything." Callum smiled. "That's because we did." As the night quieted, Maeve climbed onto the bench beneath the canopy. Callum sat beside her, hands wrapped around a mug. "Do you remember the first night?" Maeve asked. "Yes," he said. "I thought the light might turn off," she admitted. "I stayed awake to watch it." Callum looked up at the steady glow. "It didn't." "No," Maeve said softly. "And now it won't." For the first time since winter began, the cold didn't feel endless. Staying, Callum learned, was not cinematic. It was meetings with inspectors, schedules taped crookedly to walls, volunteers trained to welcome, not question. It was slow, transparent, boring in the best way. Rowan Pierce stopped by one afternoon, coffee steaming in his hand. "You've done this right," he said, surveying the space. "No shortcuts." "I'm trying," Callum replied. "That's usually enough." Maeve began stopping by after school, backpack thumping against her coat. She helped stock shelves, lining gloves up by color. "This is a walking place," she reminded an adult. "People shouldn't trip when they're tired." Callum watched her with quiet awe, not because she was extraordinary, but because she was becoming herself again. Then one evening, something small went wrong. Not dramatic, not dangerous. Marisol collapsed at the kitchen sink again, this time slower, catching herself before the floor. Exhaustion, a skipped meal, too many double shifts. Maeve froze for half a second. Then she moved. She called Callum. He arrived within minutes. At the clinic, the doctor was calm and thorough. Nothing severe. A reminder. In the waiting room, Maeve sat very still. "It won't stop, right?" she asked again. The light. Callum felt the old helplessness creep in, the knowledge that money couldn't erase limits, that systems took time, that even good lives could wobble. "No," he said firmly, "it won't." But that night, Maeve refused to sleep alone. She curled beside him on the couch, nightlight glowing softly. "If I stay awake," she whispered, "bad things won't happen." Callum swallowed. "You don't have to guard the world," he said. "That's our job." Maeve leaned against him, breathing slowing. 2 days later, Marisol spoke the truth she'd been circling for weeks. "I can't do this alone forever," she said at the kitchen table. "And I don't want Maeve growing up thinking help disappears." Callum listened. Really listened. "I trust you," she finished. Trust was heavier than money. Cleaner. Scarier. "Then we do this the right way," Callum said. "Long-term, legal, clear, no rush, no heroics. Just commitment that could survive boredom." Weeks later, the judge spoke carefully. Reviews scheduled. Oversight built in. Shared responsibility. When it was done, Maeve didn't cheer. She smiled. Outside, she walked between them, holding both hands. "This means we're a team," she said. Marisol knelt. "Yes," Callum nodded. "The kind that stays." Spring arrived slowly. Snow lingered in corners the sun hadn't learned to reach yet, but the air softened. The city felt like it was exhaling. The Stay-Lit station held a small ribbon cutting on a Saturday afternoon. No stage, no banners, just neighbors, volunteers, and people who had quietly come to rely on this place when nights grew cold. Maeve stood at the edge of the canopy, holding scissors almost as big as her hand. She wore her yellow knit hat even though the weather didn't require it. At the count of 3, she cut the ribbon. Applause followed, not loud, not overwhelming. The kind that rose and settled like a shared breath. Inside, shelves held gloves and scarves. A bulletin board displayed schedules and handwritten notes. Everything simple. Everything intentional. Maeve walked through, slowly, fingertips tracing the walls. She stopped beneath the canopy and looked up. The light above her was steady, bright, unafraid. She seemed taller now. Not physically, something else. Marisol joined Callum. "She sleeps with the window cracked," she said quietly, "even when it's cold." Callum raised an eyebrow. "She says she likes hearing the city," Marisol continued. "It reminds her the world is still moving." That evening, after the last volunteer left, Maeve sat on the bench beneath the canopy. "Will the lights stay on?" she asked. "Even if I don't come here every day." Callum knelt so they were eye level. "Yes," he said, without hesitation. "It doesn't depend on you." Maeve considered this carefully. "Good," she said. "Lights shouldn't get lonely." Later at home, Maeve spread crayons across her desk. She handed Callum a drawing when she finished. It showed 3 figures beneath a wide circle of yellow light that stretched outward, touching other small figures along the edges. At the bottom, in careful block letters, she had written, "It stays even when you leave." Callum held the paper like it was fragile, not because it might tear, but because it had changed him. And that was the quiet truth of it all. Love hadn't arrived as rescue. It arrived as a decision to stop, then a decision to stay, then a promise that didn't flicker when winter returned. The world did not change overnight. That was the first lesson Callum learned after everything settled. Mornings returned to being ordinary. Maeve woke up for school. Marisol packed lunches, sometimes humming without realizing it. The city moved forward, buses, crosswalks, lights changing on schedule, and that was the miracle. Maeve walked past the Stay-Lit station every morning on the way to school. She waved at the canopy like it was an old friend. Sometimes she stopped for a moment just to look up. The light was always there. Callum returned to his office, but something in him had shifted. His calendar was still full. His phone still rang. But he left work earlier now. He declined interviews, redirected praise. Let the volunteers and the neighborhood council speak instead. "This isn't about me," he told Sloane once. She smiled. "That's how I know you did it right." One afternoon, Maeve's school hosted a family day. The gym smelled like floor polish and crayons. Paper chains hung from the ceiling. Maeve spotted Callum immediately. "You came," she said, stopping just short of crashing into him. "I wouldn't miss it," he replied. She pulled him toward a display board titled, "Places That Keep You Safe." There was her home, her school, the after-school center, and the alley now bright. Underneath, written in careful block letters, sometimes safety is just a light that waits for you. Callum swallowed hard. Nothing dramatic happened that day. And that was exactly the point. Winter returned quietly the following year. Not with a storm, but with cold mornings and early sunsets. The kind that tested whether promises held when no one was watching. The stay-lit station stayed open every night. People came and went. No questions. No spectacle. Just warmth, information, and time to breathe. Maeve grew taller. Her voice grew steadier. She no longer flinched at sudden noises. She slept through the night with the window cracked open, even when frost traced the edges. "I like hearing the city," she said. "It means things are still going." One evening, Callum sat beneath the canopy alone, holding a mug of coffee gone cold. He watched the light spread across the pavement, steady, unremarkable, reliable. Marisol joined him, hands tucked into her coat. "I used to think safety was something you had to earn," she said quietly, "or fight for every day." "And now," Callum asked, "and now I think it's something you build," she replied. "Brick by brick. Light by light." Across the street, Maeve waved before heading inside. Callum waved back. He understood now that staying didn't mean hovering. It meant being there without being needed all the time. The hardest kind of staying. And the most honest. One quiet evening, Maeve stopped beneath the canopy and looked up. "Will the lights stay on?" she asked Callum. "Even if I don't come back here every day?" Callum knelt so they were eye level. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "They don't depend on you." Maeve thought about that for a long moment. "Good," she said finally. "Lights shouldn't get lonely." Later that night, she handed Callum a drawing. 3 figures stood beneath a wide circle of yellow light. The light stretched outward, touching other small figures along the edges. At the bottom, she had written, "It stays, even when you leave." Callum held the paper carefully. He thought back to the night he'd stopped his car. To the alley. To the child who had trusted a light more than the dark. Love, he realized, didn't always arrive as rescue. Sometimes it arrived as a decision to stop. Then a decision to stay. Then a promise kept long after you were no longer needed beneath it. Outside, the city moved on. Cars passed. Windows glowed. And somewhere between a narrow alley and a bright canopy, a child learned that the world could be trusted again. Because the light stayed on. Did this story move your soul? Share your feelings in the comments and rate it from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, then tap the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Click the end screen to watch another heartfelt video. See you in the next story.